All right, so why don't we move on to the next team here then, and we'll go on to CF Montreal, and we'll focus on two moves in particular. We will focus on the additions of Jaquil Marshall-Rutty, and of course, Andrew's favorite, former Red Bull Caden Clark.
He who only scores bangers, Caden Clark.
That is not true. That is a title specifically for Darlington Nagbe, and we will prove that in the next episode. All right, so why don't we start with the move for Jaquil Marshall-Rutty? So it is a trade involving Toronto FC, where Montreal gets Jaquil Marshall-Rutty, and Toronto gets potentially up to 1.3 million in GAM, with 850,000 of that guaranteed and 450,000 of that conditional. Instant thoughts on just the trade itself. Do you think it was equal value on both ends? Do you think one team got a better of the deal?
I mean, this is a Toronto side that was walking around saying that they got the next $15 million outbound transfer in Jaquil Marshall-Rutty like a year ago. You fast forward a year, and now not only have you only gotten him for roster flexibility, let alone your 15 mil outgoing transfer, you gave him to your rivals, right? Like that is it's such a fall from grace for that organization who thought that this was going to be their ticket to the next big DP signing. They were going to sell him on and move him on. I think Montreal, it's a really interesting move because they just went out and picked up another young right back in Dawid Bugaj from Italian side SPAL. He's played 3 times in Leagues Cup so far. He started 2 of those games. I mean, haven't I'll be honest, we haven't seen much of him to this point, but it is interesting that they are going to bring this up in a system like a 3-4-2-1, 3-5-2, whatever you want to call it. Where is JMR going to fit in? Are they going to look at a shape change? What is going to be the deal here? Because you are now looking, you got a host of very, very capable outside backs. You've got Raheem Edwards, who we've spoken about before, Tom Pierce coming in from Wigan, who has shown relatively well so far in Leagues Cup, a goal and an assist in 3 games, 2 starts. Then you go to the right side, you now have Jaquil Marshall-Rutty on top of Ruan, who has been playing there recently, and Bugaj, who just came in. Coaches say that it's a good problem to have when you've got competition in areas like this, but how good is that problem? Realistically, I don't know, right? I wouldn't be shocked. I almost would kind of hope to see a shape change where you've got maybe Bugaj, for example, on the right, playing behind Jaquil Marshall-Rutty as a wide player. And then you've got somebody like Kokoro or Martinez playing as a target man. And then on the left hand side, you either go with Lassiter, Apoku, or even throwing Edwards up as a more attacking player with Tom Pierce behind him. Like your central midfield, and I mean this with no disrespect, is not really strong enough to warrant, the shape that you're in. And you can get away with rotating right backs the way you are with Joel Waterman leading a group of Joaquin Sosa, George Campbell, Corbo, whatever it may be. You can get away with playing 2 of those. So I really feel like this is leaning towards a shape change because it just doesn't make sense to start stockpiling young, promising outside backs and not playing them.
Unless they maybe stick with it this year and then try to make that change next
Sure,
year.
sure. It doesn't have to be this year particularly. You might see one of them get moved on, right? You might see players get moved on or what have you. But yeah, it's just definitely it's a weird roster makeup.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I really struggle to figure out the direction they want to go with this roster. To me, it feels like a very CF Montreal type roster where it's just like a mishmash of guys who potentially have potential. It's a weird way to say that, but a mishmash of guys with potential and just not really like any out and out stars on the team and just kind of running it with that and hoping somebody kind of breaks out. It feels like the amount of outside backs that they brought in has to be one of two things. Either, like you said, they're going for potentially a formation change or a system change, or they just weren't happy with what they were getting out of their outside backs in Ruan or Raheem Edwards or Ari Lassiter or Lapalainen or whoever, and they're just looking to bring in new people to potentially get in the mix there. I believe Marshall Ruddy has played on the left and the right side for Toronto, so if you
Mainly
needed him
the
to slide
right
on the
though. It's not like left
yeah, I
hand
mean,
on
I
the
know
left
he's mainly
was
the right guy, but if you needed him on the left, you could probably make it work. And then we'll cover Caden Clark, traded from Minnesota for 50,000 in GAM and a second round draft pick in the MLS Super Draft.
that's worth like $7 million.
It's kind of a small trade, so I'm not going to dive too much into like who won the trade, but how do you think Caden Clark plays into this? Because he's a bit of an interesting one too, because I believe in at least I mean definitely in his time with Red Bull, he was more of a midfielder, and then I think he may have played some outside back with Minnesota. So he's another interesting one to throw into this mix. Where do you see him having an impact with Montreal?
This feels like one of those moves that has we're losing another player written all over it. Like, and we're preparing for that next one. And I would imagine that with Shonier asking for transfers or trades or whatever, you're going to see Bryce Duke drop a little bit deeper. Might maybe Wanyama's on his way out too. Like, I don't really know the makeup of the contract situation at the moment, but this feels like a Caden Clark's going to come in and act as a rotational piece when Yankov is out, or one of the honestly, he could probably do a job on the wing as well. From I remember his time at Red Bull, he usually drifted out that wide, that wide area anyway. So he could probably do a job out on the wing if that's the case. But it feels very much like here's a high potential, low cost, high potential move that we could make. If we can fit him in and he starts performing, awesome. If he is good coverage for when we end up, making these moves down the line, great. If it doesn't work out, it's 50K in GAM and we move, right? We're getting that bump back in the CBA next year. Like it's worth, for a 6 month loan basically before you get that money back, it's worth it. It doesn't feel super impactful at the moment, especially as you mentioned with his, how do I phrase it? With his positional identity crisis, if you will. Like, am I a midfielder? Am I playing outside back? Like, clearly out of position for a lot of what he's doing. But I think Caden can make really, really strong impacts if given the right system in the right area. I just don't know where that is for him right now, and I think he needs a good system to make it work. So I'd be interested to see how that runs. Because I mean, like I said, he was balling out in MLS before he got that appendicitis, right? The thing that sidelines him, and then he goes back to Gerhard Struber, who is an attacking genius, for lack of a better term, and just really didn't hit the ground running. Then he goes over to Leipzig, doesn't get any time at Leipzig, gets put out on loan to the Denmark second division, gets 50 minutes since his time there, comes back to Minnesota, plays a good bit for Minnesota, just out of position. Where does he now fit? I have no idea. So that's going to be on Courtois to figure out. Be really interested to see how that plays out, because I in my heart of hearts I believe he has a lot still to give. It's just a matter of who can get it out of him, and if there's anybody in MLS right now that can work with the youth and get them to perform, it's Laurent Courtois.
Well, I'll say I would agree with you. I think it's just a low risk, potentially high reward move where it's 50K in game and a second round pick. It's really you're not really missing anything by taking a flyer on Kane Clark, who once upon a time had massive potential. So if you can find a way to get that potential out of him again, I think that's huge, especially for the price that you were paying for it. So why not? There's no harm in it. I agree with you. I don't think he has much of an impact this season, probably more so for the future, for like you said, maybe a potential move of somebody out. But the question is, do you think those additions are enough for Montreal to make a serious playoff push? And I don't mean like necessarily they'll make a deep run in the playoffs. Do you think these additions give them the bump they need to make it into the playoffs?
No, I don't think so. I think it's close. It'll keep them in the hunt. Now, granted, everybody's still in the hunt. There's gonna be a great race to the end. That being said, I think Atlanta, who we're probably going to talk about here in a little bit, has gotten better. Toronto may fall out here. Philadelphia is going to be an interesting one. They're going to be right in the thick of things, but I don't think it'll be these two new signings that put them over the edge. If they make it in, I think it's a combination of what they've already got going, an improvement maybe defensively, or it will be one of the other teams falling out. I don't necessarily, like when you sign Nico Ladero, you're like, okay, Nico Ladero brought Seattle from nothing to greatness in that 2016 year, right? I don't think we're turning around and be like, oh, Jaquil Marshall-Rutty and Caden Clark brought Montreal from 11th to 7th, missed out on the play-in game, and then went on a run to win MLS Cup. I don't see that happening. I think there's a lot of other problems they need to fix, and again, it's a young team. It's going to take time, but I don't think these two are the end-all be-all answer.
Yep, I would agree. Considering how many open DP spots they have still open, they need to bring someone in at that level in order for me to really think that they've added the pieces they need to make that playoff push. These two in particular, Marshall-Rutty and Caden Clark, I don't think move the needle for them in terms of playoff push. Like you said, Atlanta's strengthened around them. We'll talk about Philly in a minute, but you could argue that they've strengthened around them as well. We've talked about DC. DC added some people as well. They're only 1 point behind Montreal, so they're in the mix as well. It's going to be hard. Like you said, everybody from 9th to 15th is within 5 points of each other. So you really got to like add to strengthen your team if you're going to make this push, because it's just too close together to be making some fringe moves to try to take a risk on hoping that they pan out and bump you into the playoffs.
Yeah, 100%.